You don't think about the little things when you're in a war zone. The sound of your son laughing, the smell of coffee in the morning, the way your wife leans against your shoulder during a movie. You can't let yourself think about it. It hurts too much. That's what I told myself during those 2 long years overseas. I focused on the mission, on staying alive. But when the plane touched down at Fort Carson, all those memories I'd locked away came rushing back. I stepped off the transport, my duffel bag heavy on my shoulder, and took a deep breath of the crisp Colorado air. I was home, 2 weeks earlier than planned, too. I couldn't wait to surprise Joan and Kyle. Kyle, my boy. He was 6 when I left. I missed his 7th birthday, his first lost tooth, and all the little moments you can't get back. But I told myself it was okay. I was here now. I'd make it right. I asked the taxi to drop me off a block away. I wanted to take it slow, let it all sink in. The neighborhood hadn't changed much. The same leaning mailboxes, the same flamingo lawn ornament at the Warrens' house. It was comforting in a way, but when I saw my house, something felt off. The roses Joan had spent years tending were gone, replaced by plain shrubs. The curtains in the living room were beige, not the patterned ones we picked out together. And in the driveway sat a sleek black car I didn't recognize. My gut twisted. Something wasn't right. I climbed the porch steps, each one feeling heavier than the last. The key turned easily in the lock, but as I stepped inside, the house felt wrong. The walls were bare, the smell of vanilla candles replaced by something cold and sterile. Joan? Kyle? My voice echoed in the silence. For a moment, nothing. Then I heard it, a small, shaky voice from upstairs. Dad? I turned just in time to see Kyle running down the stairs. He threw himself into my arms, and I caught him, holding him as tightly as I could. He'd grown so much. Taller, thinner, but still my boy. I missed you, Dad, he whispered. I thought you weren't coming back. I swallowed hard. I'm here now, I said. I'm not going anywhere. But as I looked at him, something in his eyes made my chest tighten. He looked worried, older than his years. Where's Mom? I asked gently. Kyle hesitated, his hands gripping my jacket. She's at church. With Uncle Robert. Uncle Robert, my best friend, my brother in arms, the guy I trusted with everything. Why is she with Robert? I asked, my voice careful. Kyle looked down. She's getting married, he said quietly. To him. For a moment, I couldn't move. Couldn't think. What? I managed to say. What are you talking about? Kyle looked up at me, tears welling in his eyes. They said you weren't coming back, that you loved war more than us. The anger hit me like a wave, but I pushed it down. Kyle didn't need to see that. You did good, buddy, I said, ruffling his hair. You stayed strong, and now it's my turn. I stood, my mind already working, planning. I couldn't let this slide. Not for a second. Do you want to come with me or stay here? I asked. Kyle looked at me, his face set with determination. I want to come. All right, I said, nodding. Let's go. The drive to the church was quiet. Kyle sat in the passenger seat, his small hands clutching the seatbelt. My mind was racing. Robert had been at my wedding. He'd promised to look after Joan and Kyle while I was gone. And now this? Dad, Kyle said softly. Are you mad? I glanced at him. Not at you, buddy. Never at you. But at Mom? And Uncle Robert? I gripped the steering wheel tighter. I'm angry at what they've done, but we'll handle this. Together. Kyle nodded, his small hand reaching for mine. I squeezed it, feeling the weight of his trust. No matter what happened, I couldn't let him down. When we pulled into the church parking lot, my stomach twisted. The lot was full of familiar cars. Joan's parents, my sister's sedan, even my parents' Buick. They all knew. They'd all been part of this. I turned off the engine and looked at Kyle. Stay close to me, all right? No matter what happens, I'm here for you. I'm ready, Dad, he said quietly, his voice steady. I stepped out of the car, the cool autumn air biting at my skin. The faint sound of the wedding march drifted out of the church doors. My heart pounded as I walked toward them, Kyle's hand in mine. This wasn't just betrayal. This was war. When I opened the church doors, the sound of the wedding march hit me like a slap. The organist played confidently, The congregation sat in neat rows, and sunlight streamed through stained glass windows. It was the kind of moment people dream about, except this wasn't my dream. This was my nightmare. Joan stood at the altar, holding a bouquet of roses in a white dress. She looked radiant, but it wasn't for me. Beside her, Robert, my best friend, stood tall, smiling as if he hadn't betrayed me. My chest tightened, but I didn't stop. Kyle's small hand was in mine. His grip was firm, even though I could feel it trembling. "Dad," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Do we have to go in?" I crouched down and looked him in the eye. "Just for a minute, buddy. Then we'll leave. I promise." He nodded reluctantly, and I straightened up. Every step felt heavier than the last as we walked into the room. My boots echoed against the hardwood floor, and heads began to turn. Whispers rippled through the crowd. The organist faltered, hitting a wrong note before stopping altogether. The silence was deafening. Robert noticed me first. His face turned pale, the confident smile replaced by a look of pure panic. He muttered something to Joan, who turned to follow his gaze. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "Owen," she said, her voice barely audible. The bouquet trembled in her hands. I stopped a few feet away from them, my voice calm but cutting. "You didn't expect me to make it back, did you?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. She looked at Robert, hoping he'd say something, but he froze. "Dad, can we go now?" Kyle's soft voice pulled me back. I knelt beside him again, brushing a hand through his hair. "Almost. Buddy, just give me a second." Robert stepped forward, raising his hands like he was talking to a cornered animal. "Nick, listen. It's not what it looks like." "Don't," I snapped, cutting him off. My voice was louder now, and I felt the weight of the congregation's stares. "Don't you dare." Joan tried to interject. "Nick, please. Let's not do this here." "Why not?" I turned to her, anger building in my chest. "Why not here, Joan? You weren't afraid to lie to everyone here, were you?" Her parents shifted uncomfortably in the front row. My parents, a few rows back, sat frozen, unable to meet my eyes. They all knew. They'd known for months and had done nothing. Robert cleared his throat again, trying to salvage the moment. "Nick, we thought—" "You thought what?" I interrupted, stepping closer. "That I wouldn't come back? That you could just take my place? You were supposed to be my friend, Robert. My brother." His eyes darted away, guilt flashing across his face. Joan finally found her voice. "Owen, can we talk about this somewhere private? Please." I let out a bitter laugh. "Private? Why, Joan? So no one has to see the mess you made?" "No. We'll talk about it right here." Kyle tugged on my hand again. "Dad, I don't like this." I looked down at him, my heart breaking for the fear in his eyes. "Okay, buddy," I said softly. "We'll go." I straightened up, turning back to Joan and Robert. My voice was steady. "You made your choice. Both of you. Now you're going to live with it." Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked back down the aisle, Kyle by my side. The crowd parted, their whispers following us all the way to the door. I didn't look back. The cool air outside hit me like a shock to the system. I knelt in front of Kyle, resting my hands on his small shoulders. "Are you okay, buddy?" He nodded slowly, though his eyes were wide with worry. "Are you okay, Dad?" I forced a smile. "I will be. Don't worry about me, all right? I've got you." He hesitated, then threw his arms around my neck. "I don't want to go back there." "You won't," I promised, my voice firm. "We're going home. Just you and me." The drive back was quiet. Kyle sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, his little hand clutching the seatbelt. I glanced at him every few minutes, trying to think of something to say, but the words wouldn't come. He deserved better than this, better than me. When we got home, I carried him upstairs and tucked him into bed. He murmured something in his sleep, but I kissed his forehead and whispered, "It's okay, buddy. I'm here." Downstairs, the house felt emptier than ever. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone. My hands shook as I scrolled through my contacts, stopping at Chloe's name. She was the only person I could trust now. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "Owen," she said, her voice calm but concerned. "What's going on?" I need your help, I said, my voice rough. Robert and Joan, they're not done. I think they're going to try for custody. They've already tried turning Kyle against me. She exhaled sharply. All right, she said after a pause. I'll start digging tonight. But, Nick, if this goes to court, they'll hit hard. They'll use your deployment, say you were absent. I know, I interrupted. That's why I need you. Find everything you can. Emails, finances, anything they've been hiding. Chloe's voice softened. Nick, you need to focus on Kyle. He needs you more than ever. I won't let them take him, I said firmly. Not now. Not ever. After I hung up, I sat there in the dark, the weight of it all pressing down on me. I didn't know how this was going to end, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let them win. The house was silent when I woke up the next morning. Too silent. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my cold coffee. The events from the church yesterday played on a loop in my head. The whispers. Joan's face when she saw me. The way Robert tried to explain, as if there was any excuse for what he'd done. Upstairs, I heard the soft thud of Kyle's feet on the floor. A moment later, he appeared in the doorway, still in his pajamas, his hair a mess. He rubbed his eyes and looked at me. Morning, buddy, I said, trying to sound normal. Want some cereal? He nodded slowly, climbing into the chair across from me. As he poured his bowl, I watched him carefully. He looked smaller today, like he was carrying something too big for his little shoulders. I wanted to reach out, to tell him everything would be fine, but I couldn't lie to him. Not now. Dad, he said suddenly, breaking the silence. Are you still mad at Mom? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I set my mug down, forcing myself to answer carefully. I'm not mad at her, I said slowly. I'm just disappointed. And hurt. He stared at his cereal for a long time before speaking again. Do you think she's mad at us? No, buddy, I said firmly. This isn't about you. None of this is your fault. You know that, right? He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. I wanted to say more, to make him believe it, but the words wouldn't come. Later that afternoon, Chloe called. I stepped outside to take the call, pacing the porch as she laid everything out. Nick, she said, her voice steady but tense. I've been digging into Robert's business dealings. He's been using your name to secure contracts, telling people you're still involved. I gripped the phone tighter. How bad is it? Bad, she said. He's been leveraging your reputation to land deals. It's fraud, Nick. Plain and simple. And Joan, she's been moving large amounts of money. I think they've been planning this for a long time. I leaned against the railing, the cold air biting at my skin. And Kyle? Have they said anything about him? Chloe hesitated. Not directly. But if they're going for custody, they'll use everything against you. Your deployment, your time away, even your mental health. The knot in my stomach tightened. Let them try. Nick, she said gently, you need to be smart about this. They're not going to play fair. I know, I said quietly. That's why I called you. That night, after Kyle went to bed, I opened the file Chloe had sent me. The photos were like knives to the chest, Robert and Joan together at restaurants, at Kyle's soccer games, even at the school open house. They looked so comfortable, so natural, as if I'd never existed. The rage boiled over before I could stop it. My hands shook as I scrolled through the messages and bank statements. They'd stolen more than just my trust. They'd stolen time. Time with my son that I could never get back. I sat there for hours, piecing it all together. Every transaction, every photo, every lie. It was a web of betrayal so deep I could hardly breathe. But beneath the anger, something else stirred. Determination. They thought I wouldn't fight back. They thought I'd let them win. They were wrong. The next morning, I dropped Kyle off at school. He looked up at me before heading inside, his eyes searching mine. You'll be here when I get out, right? Always, buddy, I said, ruffling his hair. I'm not going anywhere. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I watched him walk up the steps, my chest tight with guilt. He deserved stability, safety. I had to give him that, no matter what. From the school, I went straight to Chloe's office. She greeted me with a stack of papers and a grim expression. Robert's been meeting with people in secret, she said. Lawyers, business contacts, even your parents. He's building a case, Nick. He wants to paint you as unstable. I clenched my jaw. And my parents? What are they saying? Chloe hesitated. They've been supporting him, financially and emotionally. Your mom talks to Joan almost every day. I felt the ground shift beneath me. I'd expected betrayal from Joan and Robert, but not from my own family. All right, I said finally. What's our next step? Chloe slid a file across the desk. We start building our case. Custody. Financial fraud. We're going to prove they've been conspiring against you. I nodded, my resolve hardening. Let's do it. That afternoon, I picked Kyle up from school. He climbed into the car with a drawing in his hand. A picture of the two of us, standing under a tree. Do you like it? He asked, holding it out to me. I smiled, my throat tight. I love it, buddy. It's perfect. As we drove home, he chattered about his day, his voice light and full of excitement. For a little while, I let myself believe everything was normal. But when I tucked him into bed that night, the weight of it all came rushing back. He looked up at me as I pulled the blanket over him. Are we going to be okay, Dad? I sat on the edge of his bed, brushing his hair back. Yeah, buddy, I said softly. We're going to be okay. I promise. He nodded, his eyes already drooping closed. Good. I like it when it's just us. Downstairs, the house was quiet again. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the file Chloe had given me. The evidence was damning. Proof of lies, manipulation, fraud. It was enough to start building my case, but it didn't feel like enough. Not yet. I picked up my phone and texted Chloe. Keep digging. I want everything. They thought they could take my son. They thought they could break me. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. The house was quiet in a way that felt unnatural. Kyle was upstairs, humming to himself as he built something with his Legos. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of documents Chloe had sent me. Each page told the same story. Betrayal, planned and executed while I was thousands of miles away. Photos of Robert sitting at Kyle's soccer games. Bank statements showing Joan's secret accounts. Emails where Robert had signed my name on contracts. It wasn't just about their betrayal anymore. They weren't just trying to hurt me. They were trying to erase me. I ran a hand over my face, exhaustion tugging at me. But there was no room for rest, not now. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of small footsteps. Kyle appeared in the doorway, clutching his sketchbook under one arm. His dinosaur pajamas were too short now, and his hair stuck up in all directions. For a moment, he looked so small. Too small to be caught up in something like this. Morning, buddy, I said, forcing a smile. You sleep okay? He shrugged and climbed onto the chair across from me. His eyes landed on the mess of papers covering the table. What are you working on? I hesitated. Just boring grown-up stuff, I said, sliding the stack to the side. Nothing you need to worry about. He tilted his head, studying me. Is it about Mom and Uncle Robert? His question hit me like a punch to the gut. I tried to keep my expression calm. Why do you think that? Because you always look mad when you talk about them, he said quietly. I sighed, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the table. Kyle, listen to me, I said softly. None of this is your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. I know, he said, but his voice was small. I just don't like it when you're sad. His words cut deeper than any of the lies Robert and Joan had told. I reached across the table and took his hand in mine. I'm not sad, buddy, I said. I'm just trying to make sure things get better. For both of us. You believe me, right? He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Yeah, I believe you. Good, I said, forcing a smile. So, what's in the sketchbook? Can I see? His face lit up, and he flipped to a page where he'd drawn the two of us standing under a tree. It's us, he said proudly, because we're a team. I felt my chest tighten, but I smiled back. That's right, buddy. We're a team. Later that afternoon, Chloe called. Nick, it's happening, she said. Robert's meeting with a lawyer tomorrow. I think they're filing for custody. I gripped the phone tighter. On what grounds? They'll claim you're unstable, she said. That your military service makes you unfit to parent. They're going to use everything they can. I let out a bitter laugh. So serving my country makes me a bad father now? They're not going to play fair. Nick, she warned. And there's something else. Your parents, they're helping them. The words hit me like a blow. How involved are they? Very, Chloe said. Your dad's been advising Robert on how to handle the business fallout, and your mom's been giving Joan emotional support. They've known about this for a long time. I leaned against the counter, the weight of her words pressing down on me. All right, I said finally. What's our next step? We build your case, she said. I've got proof of Robert's fraud and Joan's financial transfers, but we'll need character witnesses, people who can vouch for you as a father. I'll start making calls, I said. That night, after Kyle had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the evidence. Every photo, every email, every bank statement, they all painted the same picture. Robert and Joan thought I was out of the picture. They thought I wouldn't fight back, but they were wrong. The next morning, I dropped Kyle off at school. He hesitated at the door, looking back at me. You'll be here when I get out, right? Always, buddy, I said. I'm not going anywhere. He smiled and ran inside, his backpack bouncing as he disappeared into the building. I stayed there for a moment, watching the other kids stream in. They all seemed so carefree. I wanted that for Kyle. I wanted him to have a life without courtrooms and accusations hanging over his head. From there, I drove straight to Chloe's office. She greeted me at the door, holding a stack of papers. Robert's fraud is undeniable, she said. He's been using your name to land contracts. It's going to hurt him in court. And Joan? I asked. She's been funneling money into private accounts for months, Chloe said. It looks like she planned to cut ties long before you got home. I nodded, my jaw tightening. And my parents? Chloe hesitated. Your dad's been giving Robert advice. Your mom's been helping Joan prepare for court. They're all in this together. I exhaled slowly, running a hand over my face. All right, let's focus on what we can prove. Chloe nodded. We'll keep gathering evidence. And we'll get witnesses, people who know the kind of father you are. That night, as I tucked Kyle into bed, he looked up at me with sleepy eyes. You're not going to let them take me, right? I leaned down, brushing his hair back. Never, buddy, I said firmly. You're mine, and no one's going to change that. He smiled faintly, his eyes drifting closed. I stayed by his side for a while, listening to his soft breathing. He was my whole world, my reason for everything. They thought I'd let them win. They thought I'd walk away. They were wrong. The court papers sat unopened on the counter for hours. Just seeing Joan and Robert's names on the envelope made my stomach turn. I finally tore it open late that evening, knowing what I'd find. They were filing for custody. The words on the page felt like a punch. Unstable, absent, unfit. Lies twisted into accusations, aimed to make me look like a stranger to my own son. I stood there, gripping the paper tightly, my mind racing. Did they really think they could take Kyle from me? My son, who I'd thought of every day during deployments, whose face was the reason I kept going. They didn't know me at all. Dad? Kyle's voice broke through my thoughts. He was at the bottom of the stairs, his hair sticking up and his sketchbook under one arm. Can you help me with my project? I folded the papers and forced a smile. Of course, buddy. I followed him upstairs, my chest tightening as I watched him explain his school project with excitement. He didn't know what was happening, and I wanted to keep it that way for as long as possible. He deserved his childhood, no matter how messy the rest of this got. Later that night, after Kyle was asleep, Chloe came over. She dropped a thick folder onto the kitchen table and opened her laptop. Nick, this is bad, she said, her tone sharp. They're building their case around you being emotionally unstable. They're going to argue that your time in the military makes you unfit to parent. I clenched my fists. And Robert? What's his angle? Chloe's expression darkened. He's going to paint himself as the steady figure in Kyle's life, the reliable one. And, Nick, your parents are supporting them. The words landed like a blow. What? She nodded grimly. Your dad's been advising Robert on his business fallout. Your mom's been giving Joan emotional support. They're all in this together. I leaned back in my chair, running a hand over my face. I shouldn't have been surprised, but it still stung. What's our next step? I asked finally. Chloe pushed a file toward me. We remind the court who you are. I've got evidence of Robert's fraud, Joan's financial schemes, and their attempts to alienate Kyle from you. We need to show the truth and show that you're the parent Kyle deserves. The next week was a blur of preparation. During the day, I focused on Kyle, helping with homework, building Legos, and reading stories before bed. At night, Chloe and I pored over every piece of evidence we could find. Emails, contracts, bank transfers, it was all coming together. But it wasn't enough to have facts. The court needed to see me as Kyle's father, not just a man defending himself. One evening, as I tucked Kyle into bed, he looked up at me with serious eyes. "Dad, are you and Mom mad at each other?" I sat down on the edge of his bed, sighing. "We don't agree on some things right now," I said carefully, "but we both love you. That's what matters most." "Are they mad at you?" he asked quietly. I hesitated, brushing a hand through his hair. "Maybe," I admitted, "but you don't need to worry about that, buddy. My only job is making sure you're okay." He nodded, but his brow stayed furrowed. "I don't want to have to choose." My heart ached at his words. "You won't have to," I said firmly. "I promise." The day of the hearing came too quickly. I dropped Kyle off at school that morning, and he held onto my hand a little longer than usual. "You're picking me up later, right?" he asked. "Always, buddy," I said, giving his shoulder a squeeze. "I'll be here." The courthouse felt cold and intimidating, but Chloe's steady presence kept me grounded. "You ready?" she asked. I nodded, even though my chest felt tight. "Let's do this." Inside, Joan sat next to Robert, both of them whispering to their lawyer. I caught Joan's glance, but she looked away quickly. Robert, on the other hand, smiled smugly, as if he'd already won. I ignored him. This wasn't about them. Their lawyer started by painting a picture of me as unstable, someone who had been absent too often to be a proper father. Joan teared up on the stand, talking about how hard it had been to raise Kyle alone. It was all lies, but the performance was convincing. Then it was our turn. Chloe presented the evidence methodically. Robert's fraud, Joan's secret accounts, their attempts to manipulate Kyle. Witnesses came forward. My commanding officer spoke about my leadership and character, and friends described my bond with Kyle. Finally, I took the stand. I didn't talk about Joan or Robert. I talked about Kyle, his love for dinosaurs, how he insisted on bedtime stories every night, and the way he lit up when he showed me his drawings. I told them about the promises I'd made to him and how I'd kept them, even from thousands of miles away. When I finished, the room was silent. Even Joan wouldn't meet my eyes. That evening, I picked Kyle up from school. He climbed into the car, holding a drawing in his hands. "Look, Dad," he said, grinning. "It's us." The picture showed the two of us standing under a tree, holding hands. At the bottom, in his careful handwriting, he'd written, "Team Hale." "It's us against the world," he said proudly. I smiled, swallowing the lump in my throat. "That's right, buddy. Us against the world." As we drove home, I glanced at him in the rearview mirror. He was humming to himself, completely unaware of the battle being fought for him. And that was okay. He didn't need to know the details. He just needed to feel safe and loved. They thought they could take him from me. They thought they could break me. They were mistaken. The weeks following the hearing were some of the longest of my life. Every day felt like a balancing act between being a good father and preparing for the fight of my life. Kyle, thankfully, seemed blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around him. But every time he laughed, every time he showed me a new drawing or asked me to play with him, it reminded me exactly why I couldn't lose. "Dad, can you build the castle with me today?" he asked one evening, his hands already clutching a box of Legos. I looked up from my laptop, where Chloe had just sent me another email full of court documents and Robert's financial records. The exhaustion tugging at me didn't stand a chance against Kyle's hopeful grin. "Of course, buddy," I said, closing the laptop. "Let's make the biggest castle they've ever seen." His face lit up, and for an hour, we sat on the living room floor piecing together towers and walls. It wasn't just about the Legos. It was about showing him that I was here, no matter what, that I wasn't going anywhere. The second hearing was scheduled for a Friday. Kyle had been asking more questions as the court dates loomed closer. He wasn't naive. He could tell something was going on. One night, as I tucked him in, he surprised me with a question that left me momentarily speechless. "Dad, do you think Mom and Uncle Robert are mad because you came home?" I blinked, sitting down on the edge of his bed. "Why would you say that, buddy?" "Because they didn't seem this mad before," he said, fidgeting with the corner of his blanket. "And now it feels like they don't like you." My chest ached at the innocence of his observation. "Kyle, listen to me," I said gently. "This has nothing to do with you. Sometimes grown-ups make bad choices, and those choices hurt other people. But you don't need to worry about that. Okay?" He looked at me with wide, serious eyes. "But they said you were scary, that you're mad all the time." I swallowed hard, keeping my voice steady. "Do I scare you?" He shook his head immediately. "No, you're the best." "Then that's all that matters," I said, brushing a hand through his hair. "You're the only thing that matters to me, Kyle." He nodded slowly, and I stayed with him until he fell asleep. As I sat there in the quiet, I made a promise to myself. No matter what, I would show him the truth. Not with words, but with actions. The second court hearing was more intense than the first. Joan and Robert doubled down on their accusations, pulling out every lie they could muster. Their lawyer even brought up my deployment records, trying to paint my time in the military as a sign of instability. I could feel the tension in the courtroom as they laid out their case, but I refused to let them see me react. When it was Chloe's turn, she dismantled their arguments piece by piece. She presented the timeline of their betrayal, the fraudulent contracts Robert had signed, and the financial schemes they'd hidden from me. Then, she brought in witnesses who knew Kyle and me, his teacher, who spoke about how involved I was in his education, a neighbor, who talked about the nights I spent playing catch with him in the yard, and even my commanding officer, who testified to my leadership and character. Finally, I took the stand again. This time, I spoke directly to the judge. I talked about Kyle, his quirks, his dreams, his love for art. I told the court about the nights I stayed up with him when he had nightmares, about the moments we spent building Lego castles and reading bedtime stories. I didn't talk about Joan or Robert. This wasn't about them. This was about Kyle. When I stepped down, I caught a glimpse of Joan. She looked away quickly, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. Robert, on the other hand, still wore that smug smile, but I could tell it was starting to crack. That evening, I picked Kyle up from school. He ran to the car, waving a piece of paper in his hand. "Look, Dad, I got a gold star in art class." I took the drawing he handed me, a picture of the two of us at the park, throwing a baseball. "This is amazing, buddy," I said, smiling. "I'm so proud of you." "Can we go to the park tomorrow?" he asked, climbing into the back seat. "Absolutely," I said. "Anything you want." As we drove home, Kyle chattered about his day, completely oblivious to the weight I was carrying. I let his voice wash over me, grounding me in the moment. No matter what happened in that courtroom, I had to remember this. These moments with him, the ones that made everything worth it. That night, Chloe called with an update. "Nick, we're making progress," she said. "The judge is starting to see through Joan and Robert's act. But they're not going to back down easily. They'll keep pushing." "Let them," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not giving up." "You're doing everything right," Chloe said. "Just keep showing the court who you are." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet kitchen, staring at Kyle's drawing on the fridge. It was simple, just two stick figures throwing a ball, but it meant everything to me. It was a reminder of what I was fighting for. Not revenge, not to win, but to protect the one thing that mattered most. They thought they could rewrite my story. They thought they could take Kyle from me, but they were wrong.